We're now ready to analyze that problem that you've come up with. You now have, hopefully, a well-defined problem to work on, but now you have to rip it apart to find out what's causing that problem. You have to do that before you can develop solutions and execute those solutions. And the output of this unit will be that you'll have some baseline data. You'll know where you're starting from so that anything else we do after that will now have a frame of reference. You'll also have a list of the most influential factors causing that problem. Now, to do that, you're going to have to decide what you need to know about that problem. And you're going to have to collect information in such a way that gives you patterns. It's those patterns that will help you determine the root causes or the most influential factors of the problem. And we've got some tools to help you do that. Those tools include forming a checklist, data gathering, Pareto analysis, Fishbone diagramming, and flowcharting. You may not need them all, but every one of them is a powerful tool to help you organize and analyze information. Do you remember Alice? Alice, who was going to form a safety committee and bring the problem of injuries down to that committee? Let's take a look at her group and see what happens to a team of people who go off trying to gather information like a bunch of unguided missiles.
Look, can we get going here? I think it's obvious that Pharaoh will respond to our ideas if we stress improved quality, efficiency, and cost reduction.
Yeah, it sounds like an issue where everyone has some interest. Where are we so far?
Well, last week we agreed on the problem statement. Then we went out to gather whatever data we could come up with.
So let's hear the data already.
Hey, park a chariot, Sam. I got some numbers here. The total number of injuries in the last few months has been 276.
276? Yeah. What are you talking about? I looked at total serious injuries on this phase of construction. I got 182.
Whoa, wait a minute. Maybe this will help. I researched disability claims, and it turns out that for every work hour logged in, there was a 10% loss in terms of total hourly salaries. Now, the hourly salaries for last year were $273,065, which should be within 5% of this year.
Wait a second. I still don't understand what all those numbers and percentages have to do with the problem.
The point is that last year we lost 978 workdays because of work injuries, and disability claims are up by 8%.
You know, it's too bad I wasn't here last week because I already had those numbers in one of my reports.
You already had them? And I just spent a week trying to find them.
We really do have a problem here. I mean, the numbers don't even relate to one another.
Yeah, what are we supposed to do with all this information? We already know there's a problem.
All right, look, maybe I can help sort things out here. I did a survey to gather some information.
Right, Sam, I got some feedback on your survey.
Yeah, so did I. When you got through interrogating people, they wouldn't even talk to me about the problem.
What are you talking about? Just because I believe in getting to the point. Is Ralph your real name?
Oh, yes.
Well, you have to do a lot better than that, Ralph.
You've got to be careful not to threaten people when you collect information.
Okay, you're right. Maybe I went too far when I twisted his arm.
You twisted Ralph's arm? We're supposed to prevent injuries, not inflict them.
All right. Besides, all he told me was some rumor that the swing shift people are really angry about this.
Great. So now we have two different numbers on total injuries, a bunch of percentages on disability claims, and a rumor. What are we supposed to do?
Well, it seems pretty clear to me. We should develop better systems for reporting injuries. It's pretty obvious from this data that we have no idea what's really going on.
You said something about the swing shift. Well, that rings a bell with where I found a lot of the reported injuries. I wish we had some more numbers on this.
Well, forget it. I got everything I could out of those guys. Besides, I still think we should look at the reporting system.
Oh, people, please, there has to be a better way to analyze information than this.
Well, it's in the reporting system. That's what you take a look at.
No. There certainly is a better way to analyze information. Their problem was caused by the fact that the team never really decided what kind of information they wanted to go out and get. And they didn't collect it in a way that made any sense to them later on. Before you can begin the process of data gathering that leads to patterns, that leads to influential factors or root causes, you've got to organize your ducks. You've got to decide what kind of information do we need to go out and collect. One handy way to help you do that is to construct a checklist. Exactly the same thing that you and I do before we go to the supermarket. It's a list of all those things you want to make sure that you hit. Now, when you construct a checklist, the first thing you do is you brainstorm for ideas about what kind of information we need about this problem. And then you put that information into categories. And then you make sure you assign people to each category, and you agree in advance how they're going to collect information. One way to help trigger your thinking about what kind of information do we need on this problem is to ask yourself basic questions. For example, who, what, where, when, why, and how. Let's assume that you've already constructed your checklist. You're now ready to go out, or you think you're ready to go out, into the field and collect information. Before you go, there are some guidelines that you should follow to prevent you from wasting your time. First of all, if the information already exists in your organization, you ought to go out and go get it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. The information you collect should be timely. You shouldn't get more information than you need. Many teams blow themselves away by providing information overload. It's also very important that you be diplomatic when you collect information and not ruffle anyone's feathers. One way to help you do that is to conduct a dry run and practice a little bit with the members of the team. It's also very important that you all agree on a standardized form so that when you bring the information back, you're comparing apples to apples. After you collect the information, you now have to process it. You have to look at it to see if there are any patterns in there that make good sense to you. Now, a very helpful way of analyzing information so that patterns emerge is to use Pareto analysis. Vilfredo Pareto was a 19th century Italian economist who discovered that 80% of the wealth in Italy was owned by 20% of the people. What he discovered was the 80-20 rule. That rule impacts on us every day. For example, 80% of the beer in this country is consumed by 20% of the people who drink beer. 80% of Medicare costs are attached to 20% of the patients. What we're trying to discover in Pareto analysis is that pattern emerging in the problem that you are working on. If you can establish the famous Pareto pattern, then you'll be able to identify right away where most of your problems are occurring, so you don't waste your time. What you're really trying to achieve is a pattern that looks like this. This is the famous Pareto diagram, where most of the cause of the problem, or most of the occurrences of the problem, can be identified. If you can attack this, you've wiped out 80, 60, 70% of your problems. That's what we're trying to do. Well, how do you achieve this Pareto diagram? The first thing you have to do is you have to define the categories. More or less, we've done that with our checklist. When your troops come back, bringing the data that they've collected, we have to sort through it. We have to see if any patterns are emerging. Soon what you'll construct is a kind of bar graph where different people will report back different bits of information. If you continue to refine these Pareto diagrams and search for this kind of distribution, you'll eventually be able to have this as a guide for where to apply your energies for quality improvement.
Janet, you go next.
Right. Well, as we agreed, I used the same 3 workgroup categories that all of you used on the checklist. Regular day shift, overtime, and swing shift. Now, I focused on where the injuries were happening during the regular day shift. We had 8 injuries at the loading ramp and 6 at the stone block lifting site.
Yeah, but we still haven't found a pattern that can point to any contributing factors.
Well, let's try Pareto analysis. That ought to tell us something.
Good, good.
What if we break down the overall number of injuries by location, job level?
I thought you said the Paretos would tell us something. I don't see what this tells us.
We've got lots of other data here. Now, the flat Paretos help us eliminate some of the possible causes. They've shown us that the injuries have nothing to do with job level or location. Let's try another one. Let's take a look at the number of injuries for each of the 3 work shifts. Now, I found 22 injuries during the regular work shift. Sam, what did you find on overtime?
There were a total of 33.
Now, wait a second. I had the swing shift figures, And there were 221 injuries on the swing shifts.
Hey, it looks like we have something this time.
I don't believe it. There's a definite pattern there.
Well, it sure looks like most of the injuries happened during the swing shift.
That's fantastic. Then the cause of the injuries must have something to do with that work shift.
Yeah. I think we have a real starting point to identify the cause of the injuries.
Well, all we've done is identify a pattern.
No, I tell you, we've solved the problem. I've been against these swing shifts since they were introduced. And with this information, I think it's time we got rid of them.
I think the real solution is to stop working on Fridays. Well, that's when most of the swing shifts are scheduled.
Well, that won't work. We have to work on Fridays. It's payday.
What about changing the swing shift's work hours? That ought to do it.
They did pretty well on their Pareto analysis, but they got stuck. It bogged down when they went off to rush to solution. They didn't seek consensus on the primary causes of the problem. They essentially forgot their data. What they could have used is another very helpful tool called a fishbone diagram. A fishbone diagram is kind of a structured way of brainstorming around problems so that you really get down to those primary causes or influential factors. Let's assume, for example, that we were a group of police officers assigned the task of traffic problems, traffic collisions in our town. Our Pharaoh, the chief of police, demands that we do something about traffic accidents. Well, we don't know where to start, but we follow our process. We construct a checklist, we gather information, we do a Pareto analysis, and we discover that on one intersection, 60 or 70% of the problems seem to be occurring. We're now ready to do a fishbone diagram on that one intersection to ask the basic question, why are most of our problems occurring in that one location? The first thing that you do when you construct a fishbone diagram is to set up the diagram. Put that problem down on one side and draw a line to it. Draw 4 more lines. Those 4 lines represent categories of possible causes. We recommend that you label them people, machines, material, or methods. Now that you've laid out your fishbone, you can begin a process of brainstorming around each one of those categories. For example, are there people causes that we haven't considered yet? Do people drive too fast at that particular intersection? Are there older or very young people in that neighborhood? Are there machine causes of that problem? Are there more trucks in that area or buses? Are there material problems such as road conditions that make that intersection unique? Are there method problems such as the lighting system that might account for why there are more accidents there than in any other intersection? When you've finished your analysis and you're brainstorming around each one of those major categories and some of the subcategories, you've identified what you think are the major causes of the problem. Now you can go back into our cycle of looking at data, looking for patterns, trying to find root causes and influential factors so that you can prove that what you think is the cause is indeed the cause of your problem. Often when you go out to look and gather data, one of the things you're gathering data about is how work is done. What is the process of work? And there you may find that members of your team disagree. One way to sort out those perceptions is to construct a flowchart. A flowchart is a simple diagram that shows you what the entire work process is. What you do is you start at the beginning of the process and then the end of the process and connect the two ends with all of the flow of work and processes in between. When you're finished, you have a pretty good idea of what the whole flow looks like, and you may want to break it down into further flows so that everyone finally agrees that indeed this is the way we do things. In my company, for example, we were having some problems scheduling workshops. People weren't arriving at the right hotels, instructors didn't seem to be ready, materials didn't arrive on time, and we got everyone together that was part of the process and constructed a major flowchart of where do we begin getting people to come to the seminars, and how do we get them registered at the hotels and making sure the materials are there and everyone is ready to go. Everybody participated in the design of the flowchart. Everybody saw where their role was so that everybody could offer suggestions as to how they could improve the process. Let's take a look at our team, the safety committee, and see how they use fishbone diagramming and flowcharting to get their act together.
Okay, now we're rolling. How about some more ideas on the fishbone?
Well, I think a possible cause of the injuries on swing shifts is the distribution of people when they're lifting the stone blocks off the rolling logs.
We don't lift them off the logs anymore, Sam. We use a lever to roll them off.
Not in the upper levels. There's no room up there for rolling the big blocks.
Of course there is.
Hold on a second. Now, I think it would be worth taking a few minutes to drop a flowchart of how all this is done. That way we could make sure there's consensus on the whole process. It wouldn't take too long, and it would be helpful to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing.
You're right. Let's start at the beginning when the blocks are delivered. Now, the first step is the counting of the blocks.
And the very last step is to remove the pins. And from that point on, it's a very different process, and most of the time it's handled by a different crew.
Okay. So everybody agrees that this is usually the standard way that blocks are unloaded and installed, right?
Yeah, that's the way it goes for the most part.
Now, is there anything we left out?
Well, I think we've established a normal process, but I know the crews have to improvise when they're shorthanded.
Wait a minute. You might be onto something. See, I interviewed some of the swing shift leaders, and, okay, here are my notes, okay. Okay, several of the leaders mentioned that they were shorthanded, that it's always been difficult to fill those shifts.
So what do? Is the lifting done differently?
Okay, according to these interviews, they've either used fewer people for the final lifting, or they've used some of the new trainees.
We're on to something here.
Well, judging from your information, Janet, we've got to get back to some of those crew members to find out exactly what they're doing differently from the other shifts.
By continuing that process, they'll guarantee that they'll eventually come up with the proper solution, because the information that they're gathering and analyzing directly relates to the causes of the problem that they're trying to work on. So many times you and I are asked to provide information for other people, or we collect information that really doesn't have any relationship to a specific cause or problem. I've done some work with a multinational company that prides itself on having one of the tightest financial reporting systems in their entire industry. In fact, everyone who works in that company constantly complains about all the information they're asked to provide, but they don't see how it's used at all. A division manager told me a story about a Frenchman who worked in the company who was a hot air balloonist. And one Sunday morning outside of Paris, he got into his hot air balloon, and the winds took him to England. He was very excited about that. He crossed over the English Channel. He'd never done anything like that before. As he lowered the balloon down over the beautiful English countryside, he noticed an Englishman, bowler hat, umbrella, standing at the edge of a large field. He maneuvered the balloon so that it landed right in the middle of the field. The basket landed. The balloon tipped over. And the Frenchman yelled at the Englishman, "Where am I?" And the Englishman yelled back, "You are in a small yellow basket in the middle of a large field." The Frenchman said, "You must be the chief financial officer of my corporation." And the Englishman said, "Well, how did you guess?" And the Frenchman said, "Because your information is very precise, but useless." The whole purpose of the analyze phase of our program is for you to come up with information that is very precise, but very useful at the same time. Remember, we said before you analyze anything, you have to understand what kind of information you need. You have to know how to go out and get it, and then come back and analyze it. The output of this phase was baseline data and a list of the most influential factors or root causes that are affecting that problem that you're trying to do something about. We talked about some very useful tools that you can use to come up with those root causes, including checklists, data gathering, Pareto analysis, fishbone diagramming, and flowcharting. Now we're going to give you a chance to try out some of those techniques so that you can clean up your act